Hello there! Welcome to Skeleton Key Productions. I'm Crown Grace Kokon. Let's get into the video. Today's video we're asking the question of what if the business plot was successful? So this was a video suggested by Greater McCheesy. He's one of our contributors, and so he's done a previous suggestion for videos as well. But yeah, so this video was suggested by him, and so that's what we're going to look into in this video. So before we get into like, the history of it and stuff, don't forget to hit the like button. We're trying to go for 20 likes per video. I know I haven't reminded people for a while, but try and get 20 likes per video and stuff, right? Because that helps the algorithm. And also, if you're watching my previous videos as well, also don't forget to hit the like button. That really helps out the channel quite a lot. Then also don't forget to share with a friend. Sharing is caring, as we always say in this channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, and also we have a Patreon account, so don't forget to check the link in the description and support this channel. Anyway, enough of a shameless plug. We'll get into the video now. So just for a bit of context, 1929 you have the Wall Street crash, and then what ends up happening from that is the country ends up going into recession. So not overly like crazy one. There had been recessions like this throughout America's history. However, this was the first recession in which the US government decided to actively get involved and to try and like fix, right? And the problem is they just made things worse, right? All the measures that they did made things worse. The Federal Reserve did a deflationary policy, so it actually, rather than there being inflation, like where the supply of money increases, there was actually deflation. Something, I think they reduced it by something like a third or something. And so this had very disastrous consequences for the US economy. And then on top of that, you had the Smoot-Hawley Act. So this was the tariff that was put in place as well. So the basic idea of this was just like with any protectionist policy. The idea was basically, if you have a tax on foreign imports, then, a lot of these goods will be made in America. So this should create American jobs, American first, right? Now, the problem with that is it doesn't work, and actually it just made the problem worse, because then other countries put tariffs on American goods, so then it ends up hurting everyone involved, right? And also you increase the price of things for consumers, so people have to spend more to get the same stuff, or to pay more to get worse quality stuff. So the distortions in the marketplace, combined with many other things as well, this is what made the recession into the Great Depression. So during this Great Depression, you obviously had many people who were in a very bad situation. You had mass unemployment now, and it was a situation where many people obviously needed money to support their families. And the angriest group within this whole debacle were the war veterans of World War One. So these are people who had served obviously in World War One, and they'd been promised in 1924 that they'd be able to collect their pensions early. And that was what they basically wanted to do now. They obviously had families to look after, they had homes to look after, and so they basically was like, we want to collect our pensions now. However, the US government under Herbert Hoover said no. So then what they end up doing is 17,000 former veterans combined with about 26,000 other supporters end up going to Washington DC to protest this and to demand their pensions. So very cleverly, in an election year, President Herbert Hoover sent in the cavalry. And I don't mean that in like a metaphorical way, as in like, oh, he sent in the cavalry. No, he literally sent in the US Army cavalry to crush this thing, right? And it was led by General MacArthur, who, he would be very famous in the Pacific Campaign in World War II, and also in the Korean War, right? However, this time now, he was leading a part of like the US Army, and so he led the US cavalry in crushing this protest, right? And these protesters were known as the Bonus Army. Now, the leader of this Bonus Army was none other than Major General Smedley Butler. So Smedley Butler, he had served in the Marine Corps for a period of 33 years, from 1898 all the way to 1931. And, he was a very, very brave serviceman. As a matter of fact, even to this current day, he is one of only 19 US service people in the whole history of America who has won the Medal of Honor not once, but twice, right? So this is how brave this man was. So he ended up leading this Bonus Army, and when he saw how Herbert Hoover had, sent in the troops to crush it, this lifelong Republican end up switching parties and end up endorsing the Democratic candidate FDR in the 1932 election. FDR obviously ended up winning this, and this is kind of what led to the alleged business plot. And throughout this video, if I forget to say the word alleged, apologies. Like, the whole thing, it's still officially alleged, because the only testimony that we have, the only proof that we have of it, is the words of Smedley Butler himself. Yeah, so that's something I have to say with a pinch of salt. You know, it seems to be real, but it's still, because no one was ever prosecuted for it. Yeah, it still is a thing where we have to kind of say alleged, right? So that's just the kind of caveat within this video. Now, Smedley Butler, in his years of service, yeah, took part in what was known as the Banana Wars, right? So the Banana Wars are a series of US foreign interventions in Latin America, and this is basically from 1898 with the Spanish-American War all the way up until 1934. So basically America, with the so-called Monroe Doctrine, basically had said a century before that the entire Western Hemisphere, so basically North and South America, it would be a situation where if the European powers already had colonies in those areas, then it would be left alone. However, if any of these colonies got their independence, then America would protect them from being invaded by other European powers. Yeah, so this is basically the calling of the Monroe Doctrine. However, how it actually manifested itself was that it was a way for American imperial and kind of business interests, yeah, to be able to expand their reach into Latin America and the Caribbean. And so that was basically kind of what actually end up happening. So especially with the presidency of William McKinley, and then also Teddy Roosevelt, who we're going to discuss in an upcoming video, so definitely stay tuned for that. So these two presidents in particular got more and more involved in Latin America and the Caribbean. And the example that they set as presidents, yeah, would continue all the way up until 1934 with FDR's good neighbor policy, right? So this is where we start to see a bit of a sea change, but the period from 1898 to 1934, this was the period where America was getting involved in places. And obviously Smedley Butler served in the US military for 33 out of these 36 years. And he would famously go on to write a book in 1935, which was titled War is a Racket. And he said the following quote within this: "I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service. And during that period, I spent most of my time as a high-class muscleman for big business, for Wall Street and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico, and especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1902 to 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies in 1903. In China, in 1927, I helped see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back at it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents." So as we've seen mentioned in this, America got itself involved in Honduras, in Haiti. Haiti, for instance, it occupied from 1915 all the way till 1934, and then many other places as well: Cuba, China, Mexico, kind of all these different places, right? Guatemala, Dominican Republic. All these places America got itself involved in, and Smedley Butler was right at the very heart of it, yeah. And it was a thing where over time he kind of came to realize that he joined the army to obviously defend America and and the Republic and stuff, but he came to increasingly see that American foreign policy in those years was focused more on being expansionist, on being imperialist, yeah, and it was doing it for the interests of big business, yeah, and not for the interests of the American people. So with the alleged business plot, as we'll go into in a second, the very last person that you'd expect to lead a kind of a fascist coup would be Smedley Butler. So this is kind of what we're going to get into now when we talk about the alleged plotters. So the alleged plotters included several people within the political and business elites within America. Most notably, you had J.P. Morgan, it was alleged. So, obviously a very famous banker and entrepreneur and stuff. Yeah, so he was included within this. You also had John Davis, who had run for the Democratic Party in 1924. So he was on the ticket in the 1924 US presidential election for the Democrats. But he was a lot more conservative than FDR would later be. And on top of that, it was alleged that you had Prescott Bush. So Prescott Bush is the father of George Bush Sr. and the grandfather of George Bush Jr. Yeah, so these are two very prominent recent US presidents, and yeah, so he was the father and grandfather of them two respectively. So he's a very famous businessman and like a politician during that era. So yeah, so it's alleged that he too was involved in this plot. And what this plot basically entailed was this idea that there would be a fascist coup of the United States, yeah. So much in the same way as they had overthrown the so-called banana republics in Latin America, they were basically going to turn America into a banana republic, yeah. So they're going to overthrow the president, they were going to overthrow both houses of Congress, and then they were going to basically install a military junta and like a fascist dictatorship in the United States. So apparently Smedley Butler was approached by one of the people who were involved in the plot, and they basically said, right, if you lead the bonus army and basically take part in this coup of the US government, then we'll basically put you at the head of this junta, and you'll basically be like kind of for all intents and purposes the president. Yeah, so we'll be the kind of power behind the scenes stuff, but you'll have all the like pomp and circumstance. You'll have an army of like 500,000 men that you'll be in charge of, and yeah, so you'll basically be the face of it because you're a very popular person and you're the only person that we can kind of get to do this. They originally had apparently wanted Douglas MacArthur, but obviously because of his involvement in crushing the bonus army, MacArthur at this point was very unpopular with the American people, so it couldn't be him. It had to be someone else in the army, and Smedley Butler was the most popular person it could have been. But upon hearing about this alleged plot, Smedley Butler went to the press and went to Congress and basically exposed this conspiracy. And so, as I said earlier, like it's an alleged conspiracy. There was no one ever prosecuted by this. But we do have a video in the link in the description, which is basically Smedley Butler giving his testimony on what the plot entailed and stuff, right? So definitely pause the video now and go and watch that video. So. It's a small world after all. It's a small world after all. Have you watched it now? You've not watched it? Yeah, I know you've not watched it and stuff. Yeah, like maybe one or two of you have, but I know the vast majority of you haven't. It's fine. It's fine. We'll just continue the video, pretending that you've watched it. It's a very good video. It's only like 1 minute short. Like, watch it. Like, it will explain a lot. The rest of this video kind of won't make a lot of sense if you don't watch it. I'm just saying. Anyway, so we'll continue with this. So now that we understand basically what the plot entailed, we have to now ask the question of what if it had succeeded. So if by some crazy chance Smedley Butler had been tempted by this offer and had actually like gone through with it, yeah, that's what we're going to look into now in terms of like the alternative history for it. Now, the massive caveat I have to say with this video, as I say with all my alternative history videos, is this would never have happened. And the reason it would never have happened is very simply, like, this is so okay, so even let's assume that like the plot was all real and everything was all set up and Smedley Butler like led this thing and it's like, let's even assume that they overthrow like FDR and they overthrow like the both House of Congress and everything. The idea that this would ever have actually taken off the ground, this video reminds me very much of the video that we've done on the Beer Hill Putsch, and if that had succeeded in 1923, when Hitler tried to overthrow like the Weimar Republic in Germany, what would have more likely happened is that the same thing would have happened with like the Cat Putsch of 1920. So you can take over the government, but it doesn't mean that the people are just going to accept it and stuff, right? It doesn't mean that, vast swathes of the army are just going to roll over and accept it. So the problem with this is that America, is not a banana republic here. Like, kind of no disrespect to the countries of Latin America, but those countries do not have like a long history and culture of like rule of law and like constitutional like liberties like guaranteed to people and stuff. So I mean, this plot here, just looking at the Bill of Rights would be completely torn to shreds. Like just looking at the first two amendments, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom like to peacefully assemble, and to petition your government, the right to bear arms. Just this alone, there's all of that would be completely torn to shreds. So like, there's no way that the American people, who each country has its own kind of mythos as such, its own kind of its own raison d'etre, its own like reason for being and stuff, and each country has its own like national story that it tells itself, right? And one of the main things for America is that it was a nation founded on the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So to kind of throw all that out the window just because there's one president who you don't like because he's implementing some policies that for you seem to be a bit extreme. He's raising tax on the rich above 90%. He's like expanding the role of the federal government, etc., etc. And yes, all this was unprecedented, and yes, you can oppose it or support it, but the idea that you basically overthrow the entire American Republic and its constitutional like kind of freedoms and everything is just, there's no way that the American people would have like kind of gone along with this. And don't forget also that the 1932 presidential election was, it showed FDR to be incredibly popular. FDR won 57% of the popular vote in that election, right? The electoral college map for that election, it's 89%. Like it's completely, it's a blowout election, right? Like most US presidents, the longest they ever served was 2 terms. This dude was elected 4 times over, right? So this man was incredibly popular. So the idea that you basically overthrow this guy and the people just go, okay, that's cool. And never mind the fact that the Senate in that year's election went 60% for the Democrats. And then the House went 72% for the Democrats. So this is an overwhelming thing. So you've got the presidency, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, all overwhelmingly going towards the Democrats. So again, I don't really see how there would have been much public support for the overthrow of a very popular president and a very popular party platform, such as you had in 1932. And on top of that, many of the Republicans, they wouldn't have supported this either because, as much as they might oppose like FDR, the reason why they opposed FDR is because they said he was acting in too tyrannical of a way. So to overthrow him with an even greater tyranny, and this is an even greater expansion of government overreach and the trampling of constitutional rights. The idea that they would have supported this as well is just, is just bogus. It just would never have happened, And so America's culture is steeped in this idea of individual liberty. This is what the country was founded on. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. It's founded upon this constitutional protections. It's founded upon like checks and balances, and the idea that all this would just be thrown under the bus just because of one election. This would never have happened, right? So that's the massive caveat we have to say with this video. This would never have happened. But okay, just for argument's sake, let's say somehow the plot succeeds and then like people just allow this to kind of happen. Yes, there's no mass uprisings, there's no civil war, there's no revolutions. They just allow this to happen, right? So how would America be different? Well, for starters, I don't see America getting involved in World War II, like in Europe, based on this. We've covered this in the previous video. So one of the benefits of this channel going on for so long and covering so many different topics is that I can, reference like things I've already done a few months ago and be like, oh, check that video out and check that video out. This ties in nicely with that, etc., etc. So I'm not just saying it for the sake of it. I actually check these videos out because there is quite a lot of like overlap. So there's quite a lot of things that include in that video, which might not be included in this video. So definitely check those videos out. But something to note is that the war in Europe would kind of go very differently. Not in terms of like the Nazis necessarily winning. It would be a thing where the Soviets would eventually win. It would take longer, but then they would also win more control over the continent. So I don't know what the Cold War kind of looks like in that context, like whether there is a Cold War even, like probably there is, but it's it's very it's very like up in the air, like kind of like as to how that kind of would look out. Yeah, would there be a war in the Pacific? Maybe, like kind of I don't see America's kind of interest in the Pacific kind of like changing, because obviously the banana wars, as we've mentioned, China was involved in that as well. The Philippines were involved because obviously that was a US colony. So I still think that the same kind of US foreign policy interest in the Pacific would have still been the same. And so I think something like Pearl Harbor probably would have still happened. And so the war in the Pacific probably would have still happened. But other than that, America would have been isolationist, because the vast majority of people there were isolationists. Now, America being fascist doesn't necessarily mean that they would have supported like Hitler and stuff, yeah. Because as we discussed in our previous video about like the history of fascism, definitely check that video out. Fascism and Nazism and stuff is not kind of all, it's more complicated than kind of saying, oh, like everyone who's a fascist would have supported Hitler. More likely than not, they would have probably just stayed out of it. So they wouldn't have taken the side of Britain, they wouldn't have taken the side of Germany, they would have probably just stayed out of like any kind of like European war. So that's something to kind of bear in mind. Domestically, yeah, a lot of the policies within the New Deal obviously would have been like rolled back and stuff, but I don't know what would have been like the alternative. You know, they could have basically done what ended up happening in Chile in 1973, where you have General Pinochet taken over, and then they go down like a free market like route to like solving the issues. And this probably would have worked, but then obviously this would have been very unpopular because people in that time wanted the government to get involved. That, you know, that's why they supported the New Deal. They actively wanted the government to like try and solve the problem. So to have these people kind of overthrow things and then just say, oh, we're not going to do anything about it, in the height of the Depression, I don't think that many people in America would have taken that very well. You know, so probably like the business plotters would have had to make some kind of compromises, would have had to keep some of the things within the New Deal just to make it so that like the electorate like didn't like rebel too much. So yeah, it's a bit messy and stuff. Yeah, like this whole timeline is a little bit messy because it's such a kind of divorce from what is the norm, right? It's such a divorce from like what America is and what it stands for, yeah, and what it has always stood for. So, you know, so even like if we think about like if we fast forward to like 2021, if this had happened back in 1934, America, you know, the story that America tells itself would be very different, because it wouldn't be this kind of narrative of, you know, founded in liberty and like had a continual like constitution and like, you know, freedoms and everything like throughout this whole period. It's, you know, they would have been like, oh well, apart from that brief period then, or it's just the whole idea of America would be very different. How the rest of the world would view America would be very different. And it's a thing where, as we've seen in many countries in Latin America, once you have one government being overthrown like by a military junta, it's a thing where it sets a precedent, yeah, and then people kind of go, oh, that's fine, it's fine for that to happen. So more likely than not, you could end up having like a communist like revolution in America. There's so many like the whole, you know, having rule of law is so important because it has checks and balances on excessive like power and stuff, and on excessive force. So, you know, to not have any of that, you know, that would just be a recipe for like long-term instability. And this is what the founding fathers wanted to prevent. You know, like they looked at the lessons of ancient Roman stuff, yeah, as we discussed in the previous video as well. And they basically learnt a lesson from that and was like, we're going to set up a system whereby someone like a Caesar can't just come in and completely upend everything, yeah, and basically be a tyrant. So yeah, this timeline's quite a messy one, and so we're gonna have to like leave it there. And so yeah, so if you like that video, don't forget to obviously hit the like button. As we said, we're trying to get 20 likes per video. That helps out the algorithm, and also hit up like 20 likes for all the other videos as well. Share with a friend if you have any. I know some people have kind of got a few friends now after I stopped asking a few months ago, but yeah, I assume people have got a few more friends now. And also, like we said, we've got a Patreon account, so definitely donate to that, because like I said, it's my full-time job. Yeah, we're gonna be like looking at like merchandise and stuff. So if you have any ideas for any merchandise, if you have any like kind of sayings that I kind of say within the show, I already got like, for instance, like hello there, like, you know, so that could be on a t-shirt or a coffee mug or something. So let me know kind of ideas of what kind of designs people would want, and then I can kind of go off there, yeah, save certain things that you might not want as well, yeah, because that would also kind of help me as well with like planning like what to kind of do with merchandise. So yeah, with all that being said, definitely stay tuned for the next video, which is going to be on what if Governor George Wallace ended up winning in 1968. Yeah, so basically this is this is the election of 1968. You had George Wallace, who was very much in favour of segregation, famously said segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And so this is the person who ran in 1968 for the presidency, and actually he won quite a few states. So just imagining what would have happened to America if he'd either won or if he'd had so much influence and stuff, yeah, that basically he ended up tying the hands of whoever actually ended up winning that thing. So that's what the next video is going to be on. So definitely stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, have a great day and bye.